Amazing Romantic Adventures, New Book 1, From Then to Now, by Duane, the great writer. Romantic adventures like no other, and all for just you. Virtually all of us have read stories and seen movies that are far beyond our imagination, and we love them. We want to be a part of them. We want to be the characters in the story or the star of the movie. Most people have been taught that they can only dream such things, and this is true, but the reality of all realities is that we can each have a better life than we can ever imagine if we are willing to have real guidance and a real education to have such a life. It takes a person that is willing to have the courage to be a real risk-taker, a non-conformist in such a special way, a person that is not rebellious, but daring and resourceful, creative and ingenious. I am not referring to one who is over-educated and intellectual, but more so street-smart, from the experiences they have from the world around them. If, then, they are willing to climb a mountain higher than they ever have, and see what very few ever will, they may be ready to gain the first steps of true insight beyond what their personal mind will ever know, and it is all so real, so much so, that even what they can imagine will never equal what they will experience with the true reality of themselves. Most of the masses have been taught to look to something outside of themselves, such as their parents, teachers, saviours, saints, and even the gods people have decided upon to worship as their authorities. But the real challenge and real adventure is already with each of us. But we must have real guidance and a real education to be able to first recognise it. The socialised public is educated into a one-dimensional literal sense. Basically, nothing is taught about a person's insight, intuition, and most importantly, their perception beyond what they can even imagine that can be possible. The whole of life, the true reality life already is, cannot be contained in any descriptive form, such as an idea that applies to our physical life. It can be so that a person can think and decide whatever they want to, but when a person has real experiences beyond what their mind and imagination has never experienced, then they will be able to enter unseen dimensions and realities that cannot be defined with words and ideas, but can only become alive by the person who is having the experience. A person can read books about being a pilot, but if they never fly an airplane, then they never have the real experience of doing it. Each one of us is so much more than just a physical body and mind. We each actually have 4 other bodies, and what oversees these bodies is our real awareness. But to get to the real you, one must have real guidance, because there is so much to each of us that is not seen on the surface, and lies hidden even to ourselves. To discover ourselves, we must become the risk-taker. The masses, those flock of people who have in some way agreed to be educated and herded into categories that others have invented as a control over the unaware, will almost always follow their literal senses, their educated upbringing, which seems to fit so nicely into the social stream of things. But the real risk-taker does not follow the herd, and is exceptional in their thinking, creativity, and they have taken the time to develop their insight, intuition, and most of all, the true perception life is. Those who try and walk the razor's edge usually fall short of the true reality life is, because what I am referring to here is so much more than the gods of man and all the authorities of the earth with their supposed educated wisdom. The true reality life is so real, pure, and genuine that it is definitely so that one cannot imagine that such a reality even exists. It is that real. It is not up to me to convince anyone about what I am presenting here, but for sure, anyone can easily prove with themselves that they truly are so much more than a body on earth, and what they are thinking with their mind. Peter Pan did not want to go with Wendy, because he knew he would be educated and grow old. Until one is willing to come to grips with themselves and decide to explore what most people never will, then they will merely grow old and never have the life they really wanted that lies beyond their dreams. The true reality life is so much greater than any fantasy one can imagine. It is the amazing romantic adventure everyone is looking for, from all the invented systems, but will never be found here. Only those who have the heart for a real life will know what is real. Introduction. In this true life adventure, you will meet Rebazar Tars, a real guide from the secret part of life that is unknown to humans. You, as the reader, will find yourself moving into new vistas and ethereal worlds of magnificent beauty, beyond what you can imagine for yourself. In unseen universes, there is a true reality so real that it would definitely seem as though it could not exist at all. The wisdom contained in this episode of life is for everyone who has the heart to see. Take your time reading what your heart has always wanted to be confirmed, and you may be one of the lucky ones who really does see what others cannot. This real adventure is only for the real risk-takers, those who dare not to bow to what the authoritarians and the warmongers, the brutalitarians, have devised for all unaware humans. Duane, the great writer, is presenting something wonderful for those who take the time to pay attention. It will be so that very few will succeed, because the whole of life is far too real, and so a real endurance of patience and persistence must become the true intent of one, or all is lost once again into more future boring lifetimes. This is a fun episode into one of the many past lives of Duane that can help open a person's heart to so much more. The main character is Goldie, golden-winged warrior, a half-breed Indian who has amazing experiences and is able to tell about them. Goldie is now on his last scouting manhunt, and it is his time to learn so much more about the whole of life. If you read what is presented here from the viewpoint of an adventurous youth, and willing to learn about the real wonder life is, you will be amazed what can enter your life that would be of a real benefit to you and others. Of course, there will be those who will decide what I have written to be so unbelievable. We each have the opportunity to dream whatever we want, and this is your chance. Beyond the veil of our mind lies an endlessness to be explored and realized, but very few have the real courage to do so. For you, as the reader, this adventure can be as real as you make it, so have fun as you now enter into something wonderful and real. Opening scene. It was a long, dusty trail on our way to the Indian village, and the men of the troop were very weary and tired from the weeks in the saddle. We were on the hunt for a horse thief that was seen leaving the fort. The weather had been a typical summer heat in the south, and most of the men of Troop 22 were grouchy. We were hunting for an Indian who stole several of the army's horses. There was an eye-witness near the scene when the horses were taken. I don't think that anyone figured that it would have taken this long for us to find the man that took them. We had gone to so many locations where we thought the man might be, and now it's become weeks later. I am starting to think that the army is bored, and they have nothing better to do, and so they like to go on these hunts. It's a lot of suffering for the men to trail someone this far for a couple of horses that can be gotten from the open range pretty easily. I had my own companions with me, a cat I named Littlefeather. He had been with me the whole time I was in the army. I had gotten him as a kitten about a year before I left home. He was very wise, and we would communicate about certain matters, including all the scouting that I did. He is the one that told me about the Indian that we were looking for, and said that he was in an Indian village by a beautiful river, and that we would find him there. In the beginning of the search, I tried to let the sergeant know where I considered the Indian to be, but he wouldn't listen, because he had his own ideas about where the Indian was, and so the search has drug on. The sergeant that heads the troop is a hard-headed person that seems to love to catch the wrongdoer at his game. This is how the army life was, hard and dirty. There were a few men that had some common sense, but for the most part, the human awareness in this time era was closer to the caveman. Your basic brutality still ruled so many that wanted their share of life on Earth. I was not interested in the ideas of men, but only the experience I was gaining from being around them for the short time I would be here. The person who saw the Indian steal the horses was riding with us, and could identify him. He is a civilian at the fort, and from the looks of him, he's not too happy to be out on the open range on a horse for such a long time. He also lives at the fort, and as he was riding in one night, the Indian was riding out with the stolen horses. If it was up to me, I would just let the Indian have the horses, but the army has an oversized ego to defend, and so here we are. To me, it doesn't seem worth the effort to track him down. The white man has forgotten real fast whose land this really is, and how long they have been here. From the time I joined this outfit, I have seen a lot of changes, mainly for the worse, as the white man develops the open land. As I am writing my own story here, I was a scout for the troop. I was part Indian and part white. I was hired by the cavalry about 7 years ago. I had always been on my own and liked it that way, and I could see that the white man was becoming the predominant race everywhere. So I decided to mingle and gain some experience from the rough side. I was raised by my parents that were white and Indian. My dad was an Indian who found my beautiful mother after a wagon train massacre from a ruthless bunch of Indians. He never found out who they were. He was hunting with some of his friends one day, and they came across a ruined wagon train that almost made it to the Pacific Ocean. As my dad and his friends looked through the slaughtered mess, he heard a movement and found my mother hiding under one of the wrecked wagons. She is an aware and resourceful person who had studied the Indian language while she was traveling with her new husband across the North American continent to the west. Her husband was also killed during the attack and his scalp taken. She later found out through her real resources that it was her destiny to be in this situation, and that it would change her life for the better. She calmly and willingly went with my dad as he took her back to their little tribe and campsite. My dad was not one of those hostile Indians. He was a real man of nature and life. He cared about all people, and was taught by his parents that all men have their reason for being here. This is one of the reasons that his small tribe, which was his Indian friends, wanted a peaceful life among the white man. He and his friends departed from their original tribe to have their own life, because they could see the possible chaos that was coming between the white man and the Indians. Many of the Indians that my father originally lived with in the tribe were becoming defensive against the white man, and so he wanted to move on and away from them. He said that it would be the destiny of the Indians to be shoved aside by the white man, so he wanted to sidestep from some of that destiny by being away from the main tribes. He was a man of real vision, and he was only interested in surviving to provide a service to those who cared for a better understanding for all people. I had lived with my parents until around the age of 16. I was the more adventuresome type, and my parents intuitively knew it. They both suggested that if I wanted to roam the land, that I live with the white man for a while, to learn of their ways, and to expand my own views on life. My dad told me that he was shown by his real guides that I was to go out into the world and learn what I had to for now, because in the future I would need the experience. As I go along in this story, I will share some of the things that my dad taught me, and also my mother, who was actually very aware as a seer. She would not usually speak to anyone about what she knew, because in those days most people had no clue as to what a person with a real awareness was like. The only people that she had a real relationship with were my dad and I, and that's how she liked it. The reason that she went so willingly with my dad and his friends was because she was shown by her guides that she was to meet a brave and strong Indian that she would soon live with for the rest of her life and have me as her son. Her name was Sarah Miles, and my dad was called Strong Vision because he could see things that others couldn't. They named me Golden Winged Warrior because my dad was given a real vision by the great reality that showed him my future, and the next lifetime when I would present to the world of white people the secrets of the true guides. When you're riding the long dusty trail, you have plenty of time to reflect upon the events of your life. Besides, I had a cat who was very aware, who would talk to me at times, when he wasn't sleeping. For me, I had plenty to reflect upon, because even though I was looked upon as a half-breed, I had the knowledge of the gods that most men only dream about. I couldn't really let others know what I knew, or they would have had me hung a long time ago. I played the part of a good scout and an obedient member of the troop. The cavalry paid me well, even better than the troops were paid. Plus, I had a place to stay, and all my food came with my job. I was told that this lifetime was a real preparation for the future life I would have that would take place in about 120 years or so, give or take a few. This day was long and dreamy, as many of them are on the trail like this. So I like to ponder on my childhood experiences that I would have in the unseen worlds. My dad and I would sometimes be at the Pacific Ocean and playing along the shoreline. We would swim in the warm water and body ride the waves. Like most children, I loved the ocean and the beautiful water. The waves always fascinated me, as they would build up and break, then roll onto the shore. I would sometimes sit on the sand for the longest time and just watch the waves as they magically formed, and then came to life as they moved all the way up to me until they washed my feet. It was always an interesting time in my visionary dreams. My father taught me that the experiences I was having, while my physical body slept, were the first steps into the real universes, and the life I had as an Indian on the earth was only the testing ground to build my strength and awareness, so that I could eventually surpass the gods of man with my knowledge, then eventually obtain real freedom. Sometimes there would be others who would come in my dream visions. For the longest time, my father was my teacher at a very young age. He would explain to me things that I could not experience whilst I was in my body. Sometimes there were little fairy people that would come to the beach we would always go to. Dad told me that not everyone knows about these little people, but that they are very special, and they will help you learn things if you have a real heart and are very sincere. For many years, I learnt from them how to talk to the birds and the animals. The little fairy people said they like to be with animals because they are real beings. They seldom trust the humans, but they did trust my dad and mum, and they trusted me. As I grew older, I didn't see the little people as much. Dad introduced me to many different beings from various levels of life. There was one being in particular that stood out, who is Rebazar Tars. When I was young, I would just watch my father talk to this man, because what he was telling Dad was way beyond me. He was the same height as Dad, and in a way they looked similar, except this man wore a maroon-type robe and sandals, and he had a beard. When I was young, I heard the name of the man, but I couldn't pronounce it at that time. Later, as I grew older, I could remember his name, Rebazar Tars. As the years went on, Rebazar would come to me in my real visions and explain a lot of different things that I really could not understand for a while. He said that as time and events went by, that I would someday realize and perceive what he was sharing with me. He would always say that I had a very special destiny because I had a very brave heart and a real intent for what is real. At the time, I really could not grasp what he meant by what he was always telling me. He explained things so simply, but it was as though I was not hearing him at all. The way he talked was so right, but it was like a dream to me. Now that I am older and have had a lot of experience with him and my parents, I am beginning to realize what he meant. My parents were very unique. They knew things that hardly anyone else knew, except for their little group of friends. In a way, they were like the outcasts from their own tribe, because their awareness and their desire to explore the unknown were so much greater than that of the ordinary Indian. Some people think that all the Indians were into what is referred to as the spirits of life, but actually, just like the white man that is into the rituals and personality of his marketed gods, many of the Indians were into the same thing. My parents knew better, and they were so much more aware than most Indians. The regular Indians also had their labels and their own ideas about the ultimate reality, but so many of them had lost sight of the true reality and were mainly into funny rituals and praying to the nature spirits. My father and mother taught me that very few really know what the true reality really is, and that it is not a person or personality, and that it is not found in any doctrine or law, but that it is within the nowness of us, and nowhere else. My parents had a real connection to real guides. I was also introduced to them at a very young age, and I had many experiences in my visionary dreams. My parents would live out their life away from the rest of the world, but it was my destiny to be a part of the outer world in preparation for my special future. I did not want to leave them, but at the same time I had the urge to do so, because it was the call of my real being to venture out and become a real risk-taker and develop my courage. My parents told me many things, including the various worlds and levels beyond the earth. I remember certain descriptions and experiences with some of what they told me, but some things I was not ready for at the time. I think I took my upbringing for granted, and all that I learned. I figured that everyone else was learning what I did, but as I grew older, I soon found out it was not so. When I would relate my real visions to my friends, they would make fun of me, so after a while I stopped saying anything. I began to see the life of the humans and how they are. They only see the earth and the things that are material. Some of them have a belief in things that sound good, but I learned what they were deciding was more in the line of storytelling. The Indians had their name for everything, as all cultures do, but I do not want to confuse anyone here. I only want to share the simple possibilities that I have learned during this Indian lifetime on the earth. So, I will not get into all the definitions they had, but use some of what Rebazar wanted me to tell. One needs to know what Rebazar called the secret knowledge to lead them to the true reality that provides everything and is always here and now, and can only be found within our own nowness and nowhere else, not in the past or a future that does not exist, but only now. This does sound simple, but it takes a lot of years of intensive training to realize what is being presented here. The journey I have been on is an adventure into the unknown and becomes the best a person's life can be. Very few are ready to experience life as it really is, and so it was now my time.